What's up guys, Josh from Xtreme Truck and Auto. Today we're actually going to be working on a pretty cool project. We're going to be installing that 50-inch SS5 diode light bars, a couple of pods, and a roof basket on top of an AT&T disaster relief vehicle. We've done a couple of these for this company. I can't wait to show you guys the process. But one thing I do want to mention real quick is the reason why you haven't seen me on the channel recently is I've been working 2 bays because my cohort, the guy I work with, ended up getting into a motorcycle accident and did not have a helmet on. So this is a little bit of a PSA, guys. If you ride a bike, do us all a favor, put a helmet on. It's something quick, easy that you can do. And what would have protected his face from the motorcycle he didn't have on, so he ended up taking some damage, but he is okay. He's doing well. He's back at work. But let's go ahead and get into this install. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get the main kind of frame of this basket assembled and get it up onto the hoist so I can work on it from there. What we need to do is get this basket basically assembled, and then I'm gonna fabricate some mounts to mount up the light bar to this basket because it's not designed to. We'll get into all that when we get to that step. But as you can see, we're doing 2 of the SS5s in these square holes. We're installing a trigger system so that way all the switches and everything are wireless. It also gives them the ability to strobe all these lights. The vehicle does have a couple of lights that we've already installed on it, as well as a bumper, but we're going to go ahead and rewire them to this trigger system. So I'm not going to bore you guys with the assembly of this. Basically, it's just a bunch of hardware. So I'm just going to get the outside of the frame kind of put together. So got our basket all assembled. Like I said, it's pretty straightforward. One thing to keep in mind is this center one on one side has a hole. All of the other ones on this outside portion of the basket have a slot. So I like to have the hole towards the front because we are going to be mounting this 50-inch light bar out in front of the basket, which is what the customer had asked us to do. So the next step I'm going to be doing is putting the feet onto the light bar. There's 3 of them. We'll get those on, and then I have these pieces of metal which I'm basically going to use to build out a section where we can mount the light bar to the front of this. So let me get the feet on and the pieces of metal set up, and I'll bring you guys back in. This isn't the first one I've built for this customer. I've done I think 3 or 4 of them up to this point. What I do is I have this metal strapping, and we are going to grind this paint off here and weld these to the bracket as well as bolt here. That way, for whatever reason, if they need to pull this front piece off, they can unbolt back here and it'll allow that front piece to come off. As you can tell, I have measurements. My top ones are the length of these silver parts, how far they're gonna stick out. So I got 2 of them at 2 3/4, and then the middle one's 2 1/16. So all that set up, we got that centered. And then if you come over here to the light bar, we got our brackets installed. So that's ready to get mounted. And essentially the way this thing's gonna sit is when we grab this beast of a light bar, this thing is not light. It is going to sit like so. So it keeps it low profile, and kind of what I went for with these brackets is more functionality over looks. I am on a time limit of what I am able to do and use, but it works out really well. Now that I'm happy with the way everything's kind of sitting and we're ready to go ahead and weld, I'm gonna get these prepped and ready to go for the fabrication portion of this. All right, we got it all welded across. So the next thing I'm gonna end up doing is I'm gonna come back here and we're gonna drill a hole right there. We'll do one right here, and then another one right there. We'll run some bolts through, and then I'm going to be removing this piece and we're going to get it all painted up so that way it looks uniform black. Now, I did find some paint that is very, very close to the powder coating that Fab4 has, but it's not exact. But I'm real happy with the way it turns out. So we'll get this drilled, pulled off, all that other stuff, and we'll get on to installing our pod lights that are sitting over there onto here and getting everything kind of wired up and ready to go. So as you can tell, we got our light bar all mounted. I got the bracket right here made up. I got to do a little bit of welding since I don't have a brake and I can't really bend it as clean as I would like just by putting in a vise and waylaying it with a hammer. I go ahead and score the metal. That way it bends exactly where I want to and gives this bracket a really clean look. We're gonna go ahead and weld up where I've scored, so that way it's one piece, get it all cleaned up, get it ready for paint, and then we'll end up wiring up the light bar. Now, one thing I do like over here in this box is Diode Dynamics has provided us with the harnesses to wire up the SS5 cross-link light bar. Now, if you guys have questions, because this is a Pro, it does take a certain gauge of wire because of the current it pulls. So we have an awesome rep that we deal with at Diode. Like I said, their customer service is awesome. He got us hooked up with everything we need to get this wired up. So what I'll do is get this pulled off, get that welded, get it all prepped, ready to go. We'll throw it on some cardboard, we'll get it all started, the painting process started, and then we'll move on to the wiring and I'll show you guys how that's all done. So rack's all disassembled, everything's off, getting painted. So now I'm gonna be wiring up this light bar. The way the customer wants this light bar wired is the yellow on one switch and then the white on another. So we're gonna go ahead and flip this beast of a light bar over. And if you come to the wiring, basically what we have is these little cross-link harnesses. I'll get it busted out of the bag. And the way these things work is actually pretty cool, and they make this very simple, is you stick them in the back and then basically daisy chain all the lights that you want wired together. Now, if you were going to wire them up all the same, this would be a bit different, but I'm gonna get the wires stuck in the back and kind of wired up. All right, I got the cross-link kind of all set up. The way this is wired in is you have a jumper harness here that comes to a jumper harness, gives you the one out. But what we run into is the problem of getting it all the way over to this side. So they supply this wire, which we run from the back end of this all the way over to this jumper harness. Therefore, the two whites are powered out of this end. And then just a smaller version makes it a little bit easier to see of how we do the yellows. So you have the 2 here to 1, 2 here to 1, then 2 to 1, which gives you the 1 here. So I gotta get this all cleaned up, looking all nice for the guys, and we'll move on to getting the pod lights installed. I do have a trick for that because when you go to install the diodes, they tend to sit a little bit low, but I'll show you how I'm gonna fix that when I get all this wiring fixed up. So we got our Diode Dynamics pod lights that we're gonna mount to the rack over here. Now, one thing you will notice, let me see if I can do this, is if we were just to mount the pod light itself, it sits low in the hole. So what I figured out, and what we have laying around here at the shop, is we have these weather guard spacers, and what they are is basically just a 1/4 inch spacer that you use when you're installing weather guard stuff, and you put them in between ribs. Well, sometimes it doesn't fall on the ribs, so we hold on to these things to use in situations like this. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to space these lights up a 1/4 inch. We're going to throw this on here and I'll show you the difference. We're going to come back to the rack and we're going to set that right like so. And basically, as you can tell, the light sits a heck of a lot better in there. Now it is angled down a little bit, but if it's sitting up, it's pretty much flush in the hole. Grab 4 of those, we're gonna get the lights put it in. And then if you come over here to the light bar, you can see I've cleaned up the wiring quite a bit. Now, one thing I do like to do is label these connectors with a Y and a W, so that way I can kind of keep things straight, especially when it's hot out here in the shop. That's it for now when it comes to this light bar. While we're waiting for paint to dry, we're gonna get all these pod lights installed, and then I'll explain to you kind of why. Actually, I'll do it right now. So if you've noticed, I've offset the wiring to the left side. If you're facing the rear of the vehicle, it's the driver's side. On the service bodies that we work on, they have an antenna attached to them. Sometimes it's on the passenger, sometimes it's on the driver's side. This one happens to be on the driver's side. So we're gonna make all the wiring come over to the driver's side essentially, so we can just meet up with that wiring on the back of the vehicle and have it look, you know, nice, clean, and neat, because that's the big key here. So we got all of our pod lights mounted. Now my plan of attack for when it comes to wiring is I'm gonna wire the pod lights down this side, and then we'll come across back there, and then we'll meet up with this side's pod lights back over in that corner, and then that's where we'll join them together and run them up to the trigger system. What we'll do is we'll connect the harness, we'll kind of fold it over like that, we'll run it, it'll come along here, and it'll just follow this pre-existing wire down there. So we've got all of our wiring taken care of. Mind the background noise, it is during the day. I got Steve working over on his projects, and also we have fans going because it has been ridiculously humid due to all the thunderstorms, and then this summer's just been ridiculously hot. Wiring's done here for what I can get until that part's dry. It's still not dry, but I got it sit in front of the fan. So what we're gonna do is step over here. We've got the trigger system. Now, I love this thing, as you guys are well aware. We're gonna be setting up lights that already exist onto the truck, which is over there, to this thing, as well as the roof basket. But what I'm going to be doing now is basically getting the power and ground set up with the ring terminals, and then I'll bring you guys over to the truck and we will figure out where in the heck we are going to mount this thing. We got our basket ready to roll, everything's painted, brackets made, wiring is run. Then if we come over here, mind the mess, I had to park it away from my work area. We come to the truck and we have our trigger system installed. So it's secured here, it's not going anywhere. On my Jeep, I do have mine just kind of free floating, kind of as a torture test, and I've had it on for 2 years and it runs great. So these things are durable as all get out. One thing we went ahead and did is we have the fog lights and the kind of front driving lights installed to this. Now keep in mind, channel 5 and 6 are only a 5 amp fuse. So if you come over here, I actually have the relays wired in. So all that trigger is doing is basically triggering these relays, which is pulling directly from the battery. So that way I'm not blowing the fuse or causing a problem with the trigger. 1 and 2 on this channel are gonna be for the big light bar on the basket, and then 3 and 4 are gonna be for the 2 side mounted pair of cubes on either side of that basket. So our next plan of attack on the truck is we are gonna be installing the Rhino Rack backbone system on this. Because honestly, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, the way Fab 4 wants you to mount the basket over there is 100% garbage. They basically want you to drill a ton of holes in the roof and mount it to the roof that way. We've actually figured out that you can mount this basket to the backbone system that Rhino Rack has, and it turns out great. It makes it solid, and it brings the weight carrying capacity of this up quite a bit. I'm gonna go ahead and bust that backbone system out and do a little bit of prep work on the top of the truck, and I'll show you guys once when I get all that done kind of what the next few steps are. So like I had mentioned before, we've done this setup one other time on one of their vehicles and it worked out really well. What you need to do is kind of prep the roof area up there for installation of this. You're gonna lift up on this black thing and it's got these little clips. There's like 5 or 6 of them. Just be careful when you do it because it is attached right there at the end and on the other side as well. If you see those 2 gray dots, it's basically plastic welded to these portions of the roof. Now I have tape on here because what you're gonna do is I'm using E6000 adhesive silicone, and you basically glue this in. So the reason why I said you wanna be careful when pulling it up is you don't wanna rip it off up here or back over there by the windshield. But what you're trying to gain access to are these little bolts here, because we're gonna remove, I believe, 4 of them, and that's how we're gonna mount this backbone system. So I'm gonna go get the other side prepped and ready for this backbone. And once when we get to the mounting, I'll show you what bolts to pull and what we're gonna be putting on to keep it from leaking. Got the Rhino rack backbone up here. What we're gonna be removing is those bolts. I also laid it up here so you can see I've marked them with green to make it a little bit easier, but there's 4 of them. It's a 7mm to pull these out of the roof. We're gonna get those pulled. We're gonna apply this butyl that comes with the backbone around each of these holes. Now, something I like to do is just add a little bit of silicone to the thread of the bolts, just for extra security that it's not gonna leak through. So we're gonna do that. And then these are meant to direct thread into the roof itself. Now, one thing that will come in the kit and is very, very important is this ball end Allen. What that allows you to do is to get in between here and tighten these down. We got our backbone installed. This thing, man, Ford and Rhino Rack made this thing super easy to install in comparison to a lot of other things. You just undo those bolts. Now, fishing these bolts into the holes can be a little bit of a pain, especially back there at that back one. But realistically, it's so straightforward and simple that anyone can do this, and it will only take you maybe an hour at most. One thing I did fail to mention, I believe I failed to mention, is I like to take a flathead screwdriver and break those plastic welds on this. And then when you do, that piece will slide off that end cap. Same thing for the one back there. Let me get off this ladder real quick and we'll run over to the basket. Back here over at the basket, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna pick this thing up, and then we are gonna have to loosen some of actually all of the cross beams to this basket, because if this thing is not perfectly square, it does not fit right on top of the Ford. So I like to leave all the cross beams loose, but these side pieces, these side bolts, I leave tight. That way it'll allow it to shift and bend and get to where you need it to. So that way we can get it squared up on the roof, nice and even, and looking really good for these guys. I'm gonna get it rigged to my forklift over there, and we're gonna get it thrown on top of the truck. And then that's when I'll bring you guys back in and we'll talk about mounting the basket to the roof of that thing. So up on top, you can see right here, here's one of my 3/8 bolts. There's 6 of these holding this entire rack on, basically at each point of the Rhino rack mount. Essentially, this thing is not going anywhere. So what I did to get it through the mounts of the Rhino rack is I drilled both through the rack itself and the backbone. Now keep in mind that all of the little tiny bolts you see holding these kind of crossbar things together were loose, which allowed me to square this up to the Rhino rack, making it so it's even on both sides. Then I went through and tightened down every single one of them. It's a bit of a process, but you know, it allows me to get the cleanest install possible. So now I went ahead and just basically finished up the install. We got the wiring run down over to the trigger system. These systems are awesome. Basically, you have your switches, it's all wireless. You can also control it through an app, and we can turn these on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's how that's done. It makes wiring this thing so much easier than having to dig out the auxiliary switch wiring on the other side. Also, it gives these guys the ability to strobe these things. So if they ever need to strobe them or dim them, they can. Now, keep in mind that they won't be able to dim the front two because we have them run through a relay. But if anything you have hooked directly up to it, like everything up on the basket like we have on this one, you'll be able to dim it if the LED is dimmable. Now, I know from experience, Diode Dynamics can dim, so they have the ability, if it's too bright in their work area or too bright out ahead or whatever, they can dim those lights down, which is definitely an advantage. That's pretty much it when it comes to this install. We've done a couple of these for these guys. They've been really happy with them. They keep coming back and adding more things, which is a lot of fun. Sorry I am glistening, but it is unbelievably humid today. I am ready to go home and get out of this heat. But if you guys like what you see, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll catch you on the next one.